Have you ever found yourself jolting awake in the dead of night, your eyes wide open, heart pounding, but for no reason you can explain? The clock on your bedside table glows with an unnatural precision. 3:33 a.m. Not 3:32. Not 3:34. The same time. Every single night. At first, you brush it off as coincidence. But what if it isn't? What if those fleeting moments of quiet darkness hide something waiting, something you can't see, but you can feel? Would you stay in that room? Or would you run? This is where I found myself, alone in a small, nondescript apartment. It was a quiet place, tucked away in an old, weathered building. The kind of place that feels like it has seen more than it lets on. At first, I thought nothing of it. I was renting on a budget, and the creaks in the floorboards, the faint groan of pipes in the walls, they all seemed normal for a building like this. But over time, the nights began to change. The air felt heavier, the shadows in the corners a little deeper. And then, I started waking up. Every night, it was the same, 3:33 a.m. sharp. I'd sit up, my skin clammy, feeling as though I'd just been yanked from some unseen thread. I told myself it was insomnia or stress, maybe even the old heating system clicking on. But then, there were the nights when I wasn't alone. Nights when the darkness itself seemed to gather, like something watching me from just out of reach. I didn't know it then, but those nights were only the beginning. What I thought was a harmless coincidence unraveled into something far more terrifying. Something I still can't fully explain. And now, I need to tell you what happened. You might think you're safe in your room, but I used to think that too. And I was wrong. The apartment wasn't much, but it was mine. A small, second-floor unit at the end of a narrow hallway. Just one bedroom, a cramped kitchen, and a living room with a single window that overlooked the empty street below. It wasn't fancy, but it was quiet. I wanted quiet. After years of noisy neighbors and the constant hum of city life, this place felt like a breath of fresh air. The kind of quiet that lets you think. The kind of quiet that lets you sleep. At least, that's what I thought. My days were simple. I'd wake up, make coffee, go to work, come home, maybe read or watch something mindless until I was too tired to stay awake. Nothing unusual, just the steady rhythm of living alone. I didn't notice the small things at first. The flickering hallway light outside my door, the way the front door's lock felt a little loose no matter how many times I tightened the screws. Minor things, things that didn't seem worth noticing. But things started changing. Slowly. I remember the first time I noticed it. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it. A soft creak, like weight shifting on an old wooden floor. It came from the corner of my bedroom. I told myself it was the building settling. Old buildings do that. But the sound didn't fade. It was steady. A slow, deliberate shift. Then nothing. Just silence. I stared at the ceiling, listening, waiting, but nothing else came. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. That was the first night I woke up at 3:33 a.m. I opened my eyes slowly and stared at the red glow of the digital clock on my nightstand. 3:33, I didn't think much of it at the time. Everyone wakes up in the middle of the night now, and then maybe I drank too much water before bed. Maybe it was that creak that unsettled me. I turned over and forced myself back to sleep. But then it happened again. The next night, and the night after that. Always at 3:33, I started to feel watched. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? There was no one there. No reason to feel that way. But every night, as the clock neared 3:30, I would wake up tense, eyes darting around the dark room, staring into corners that should have been empty. And that's when I saw it. Just a shadow at first. I thought it was a trick of the light, moonlight casting strange shapes on the walls. But this shadow didn't shift when the light changed. It didn't move when I blinked. It stayed. Still. In the corner of my bedroom, I remember staring at it for what felt like hours, willing it to vanish. But it didn't. It just stood there, silent, motionless, watching. Or at least, it felt like it was watching. And when morning came, it was gone. Like it had never been there at all. I told myself it was sleep deprivation. Maybe stress. Shadows don't just stand in corners. They don't watch you. But that didn't explain why every night, at exactly 3:33 a.m., I woke up. And every night, it was there. Each night, it seemed closer. Just by a step. Nothing dramatic. Nothing I could prove. But it was closer. And closer. Until one night, it was standing right beside my bed. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I didn't dare close my eyes. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up. I was trapped, frozen under its presence. And yet it didn't move. It didn't touch me. It didn't speak. It just stood there. When I blinked, it was gone. I left the lights on after that. Slept on the couch some nights. Other nights, I didn't sleep at all. But it didn't matter. Wherever I went in that apartment, 3:33 still came, and so did it. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? I barely believed it myself. But deep down I knew staying there wasn't safe anymore. Leave. That was when I knew I had to go. By the fourth night, it was no longer a coincidence. 3:33 a.m. Every single night. I didn't need the clock to tell me anymore. My body knew. I'd wake up, eyes wide open, heart pounding before I even understood why. And each time, I would scan the dark corners of my room, waiting. But it wasn't just a figure. Things in the apartment started to feel wrong. Subtle at first. Things I could explain away if I tried hard enough. I'd find the bathroom door slightly ajar when I was certain I'd closed it. The kitchen faucet would drip, though the handle was tightly shut. I told myself it was nothing. Just old pipes, uneven floors. But I was lying to myself. Then it got worse. My keys, always left in the bowl by the door, were on the coffee table one morning. My bedroom door, which I never closed, was found shut. I'd wake up shivering, the air ice cold, though every window was locked. There was no breeze, no draft, but it felt like something was breathing in the room with me. I began to question myself. Was I sleepwalking? Stress can do that, can it? I searched online for answers. Insomnia, anxiety, even sleep paralysis. Maybe that's all it was. Maybe my mind was turning against me. But that didn't explain the cold. The moved objects, the sense that I wasn't alone, and then I saw it, clearly. For the first time, it was a shape, a figure in the corner of my room. No features, no details. Just darkness. Like the shadows in that corner were thicker, heavier, denser than the rest of the room. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. But it was there, watching. I stared at it, frozen. I thought if I didn't move, it wouldn't come closer. If I ignored it, maybe it would fade back into the dark. But each night, it was still there. Closer. Always closer. By the end of that week, it was standing near the doorway. Then, by the dresser. Then, beside the bed. I was afraid to sleep. I was afraid to not sleep. I tried leaving the lamp on, but the bulb flickered and burned out. I bought new ones. They didn't last. I even tried sleeping in the living room, but at 3:33, I'd wake up, cold and stiff, staring at the shadows standing in the corner of the room. No matter where I slept, it was there. I started staying out late, drinking at bars, falling asleep on the couch with the TV blaring, anything to avoid that room. But it didn't matter. One night, I woke up to the static hum of the television. 3:33 a.m. The screen flickered, casting light into the shadows of the living room, and there it was, standing behind the couch. That's when I stopped sleeping altogether. I was unraveling. I could feel it. The exhaustion clawed at me. My skin felt electric, like something was crawling beneath it. I would catch glimpses of movement and reflections, windows, mirrors, even the screen of my phone. But when I turned, nothing was there. I kept the lights on, but darkness found a way in. One night, I barricaded the bedroom door, pushed the dresser against it. I stayed awake, clutching a flashlight, barely blinking. I thought maybe it would stop if I showed I wasn't afraid. But as the clock neared 3:33, something changed. I heard it, the dresser, moving. My breath caught in my throat. The door creaked as if pressure was being applied from the other side. Then nothing, just stillness. I sat there, flashlight shaking in my hand, waiting. And then the doorknob began to turn. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring, waiting for the door to open. But it never did. Morning came, and everything was back in place, like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I was trapped in that apartment, and whatever it wasn't going to stop. I tried calling friends. I almost told them, but what was I supposed to say? Hey, I think there's something living in the shadows of my apartment. No one would believe me. I barely believed myself. But deep down, I knew staying was a mistake. I started packing. I didn't care where I went. I just needed to leave. But as I stuffed clothes into a bag, I heard it. A whisper. Right behind me. I didn't look. I didn't turn around. I grabbed my keys and ran. But even after I left, the feeling never left me. Even now, in this new place, far from that apartment, sometimes I catch something in the corner of my eye. A shape. A shadow that lingers just a little too long. Tell me, do you think it ever really left? I thought leaving would save me. I thought putting distance between myself and that apartment would be enough. But fear isn't something you can outrun. Not when it's already inside you. In this new place, the air felt lighter at first. No creaks in the floor. No cold drafts. No shadows waiting in the corners. But that didn't last. The first night in the new apartment, I slept for the first time in days. Deep, dreamless sleep. But then, I woke up 3:33 a.m. My stomach sank. The clock glowed in the darkness, casting just enough light to stretch faint shadows across the walls. I told myself it was habit. My body had been trained to wake up at that time. That's all it was. But then, I felt it, that presence. It was here, in this room. I didn't see it, but I felt it. The air thickened, heavy and suffocating. I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to turn my head. But in the corner of my vision, the dark seemed just a little darker. It hadn't stayed behind. It followed me. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, hallucinations, stress. But things started happening again. My bedroom door, always open when I slept, was shut when I woke up. The bathroom light flickered, even though I hadn't touched the switch. And then there were the whispers, just under my breath, like a conversation happening in the next room, too quiet to understand, but loud enough to know it was there. I stopped answering calls. My friends noticed I was distant, but what could I tell them? That I was being haunted? I started missing work. I barely left the apartment. I was unraveling, piece by piece. Every noise, every flicker of light, every shadow felt like it was mocking me. But it wasn't just the apartment this time. It was everywhere. In the elevator, the lights would dim for just a second longer than they should. I'd hear footsteps behind me in empty hallways. The reflections in windows would flicker, like something moved behind me but wasn't really there. It was toying with me. Then I met her, my neighbor. She was older, lived across the hall. We barely spoke, just a polite smile in passing. But one day, she saw me standing in the hallway, staring at my door. I must have looked lost because she asked, "Is everything all right?" I didn't know what to say. I stammered, said something about hearing strange noises. She went quiet for a moment, then said something that still chills me. That room's never stayed empty for long. She didn't explain. She just turned and went back into her apartment. But those words stuck with me. What did she mean? Had something like this happened before? I couldn't let it go. I spent hours searching online, digging through property records, old news articles. Nothing. No reports of deaths or strange occurrences. But I did find something. A string of previous tenants. All of them moved out within months. No explanations. No forwarding addresses. Someone always left, and someone new always moved in. I started hearing it during the day. The whispers didn't wait for night anymore. Shadows moved when they shouldn't. Lights would turn off, even when I was right under them. I wasn't safe anywhere. Then it got bolder. One night, I heard a knock. 3 slow knocks on the bedroom door. But I lived alone. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stared at the door. Then, it began to turn. The door never opened. But the next morning, it wasn't shut. It was wide open, and the dresser I had placed in front of it was untouched. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't fight it. It was everywhere, and it was getting closer. Every night, I'd wake at 3:33, and every night, it stood a little nearer. First across the room, then by the door, then beside the bed. I remember the night I saw its face, or what I think was its face. A glimpse, a shape shifting in the dark. No eyes, no mouth, just void, like the space itself bent around it. And for the first time, I heard it speak. I don't know what it said, but it wasn't words. It was intent, a message, one I wasn't meant to understand, but I felt it. It wasn't going to leave, not until I was gone, or worse, until I let it in. I realized then it wasn't the apartment. It wasn't the building. It was me. It had chosen me, and it was never going to let me go. I had 2 choices. Stay and wait for it to take whatever was left of me, or finish what it started. And God help me, I think I'm ready to answer the door. Sleep became a threat. I couldn't risk it anymore. Every night, I'd stay up, lights on, every corner of the room lit. I moved furniture against the door, blocked the windows, checked every lock. But it didn't matter. Darkness wasn't the problem. I hadn't slept in days. My eyes burned. My thoughts blurred. But that night, it didn't wait for me to sleep. 3:33 a.m. My head jerked up, but I hadn't fallen asleep. I was sure of it. And yet, I was cold, freezing, like every drop of warmth had been drained from the air. I didn't want to look. God knows, I didn't want to. But something, some instinct forced me to turn my head. It was standing right beside my bed, closer than ever before. I could see it now, clearer than I had any other night. But it wasn't moving. It didn't breathe. It didn't blink. Just a towering shadow, hunched and still. No face, no form, just a dark shape that seemed to drink in the light around it. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I stared at it, and it stared back, or at least I think it did. And then it leaned closer. It didn't touch me. It didn't speak, but I felt it. like it was peeling something away from me, like it was waiting. That was when I broke. I launched myself out of bed, throwing the lamp to the floor in the scramble. Light shattered, darkness rushed in. I ran out of the room, out of the apartment. I didn't even lock the door behind me. I didn't care. I drove for hours. No destination, just away. I thought if I kept moving, it couldn't follow. But the truth gnawed at me. It didn't need walls or distance. It was with me. I slept in my car that night, parked in a crowded lot. Streetlights flickering overhead. And for the first time in weeks, nothing happened. No shadows. No whispers. Just silence. But it wasn't relief. It was wrong. Too quiet. Like something holding its breath. Waiting. When I finally returned home the next day, the air was still. The apartment was cold, but it was empty. No moved objects. No sounds. No figure. It was gone. I didn't know how to feel. I should have been relieved, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the eye of a storm. Calm but temporary. Like whatever it was had stepped away. But not far. I tried to reclaim normalcy. I cleaned up the broken lamp, pushed the furniture back, slept with the lights off. Nights passed, and nothing happened. No 3:33 a.m. wake-ups. No shadows. No whispers. But then, I started noticing the absence. That stillness. The shadows were too still. The walls too quiet. It was like the entire apartment was holding back, frozen in place. Waiting. Sometimes I catch myself listening, expecting something. And when I didn't hear it, that silence became louder than any noise. It pressed in, suffocating. I couldn't sleep, but not from fear, from anticipation. Then one night, the clock read 3:32 a.m. I watched it tick over to 3:33, and nothing happened. I should have been relieved, but I wasn't, because now I missed it. That's when I realized it had never been chasing me. It was inviting me, and now I wanted to answer. 1, 2, 3. This time, it's waiting for me to open the door. I left everything behind. Furniture, clothes, even the broken lamp. None of it mattered. I just needed to get out. The apartment was in my rear-view mirror, shrinking into the distance. But as the building disappeared, the weight in my chest didn't. If anything, it got heavier. I found a new place across town. Nothing special. Just a small studio with bright windows and thin walls. I chose it for the noise, the traffic, the neighbors, the hum of life. I thought maybe the noise would drown out whatever was following me, but the nights here are even darker. The corners of this place feel deeper. The shadows stretch longer. I tell myself it's nothing, but every flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, every cold breath on my neck, it's still here. I wake up at random times now, not 3:33. That would almost be comforting, but random, unpredictable, and always with this presence, like something pressed against the walls, waiting for me to notice. I catch glimpses in the mirror, not reflections, delays. Like my reflection forgets to keep up, like it watches me just a second too long. I thought it was the apartment. I thought it was that place. But now, I'm starting to think it was never about where I was. It was me. I remember that night. The figure standing by my bed. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But maybe it didn't have to. Maybe it didn't need to scare me. It only needed me to see it. To know it was there. And now, I can't unsee it. I've tried ignoring it. I've tried acknowledging it. Nothing changes. Sometimes I feel like it's closer. Not standing by the bed. Not hiding in the corners. But inside the walls. Inside the quiet. And the worst part? I'm starting to think I invited it. That night when I stayed awake, when I waited, when I watched, maybe that was enough. Maybe that's all it needed. A crack in the door. And now it's open. Some nights, I sit in the dark, staring at the clock. Not waiting for 3:33. Just waiting. Because I know it's waiting too. Last night, I thought I heard a whisper. Not a word, not even a sound. Just a breath. Right next to me. I didn't turn around. But tonight I might. 1, 2, 3. Maybe it's time to open the door. I've told you everything. Every creak. Every shadow. Every moment I doubted my own mind. But now, I need to know. Was it sleep paralysis? Just some trick my mind played on me during those fragile hours of the night? Or was it something else? Something that doesn't need permission to step into our world? Something worse? Maybe you felt it too. That heavy stillness when you're alone. The way shadows seem to shift when you're not looking. Maybe you've heard footsteps when no one was home, or woken up to find your bedroom door slightly ajar when you swear you closed it. If you've ever experienced something you couldn't explain, something that made you question what's real and what isn't, I want to know. Share your story in the comments below. Let me know I'm not the only one. And if you want to hear more stories like this, more truths hidden in the dark, don't forget to subscribe. Turn on the notifications. That way, you'll know when the next story finds you. Because it will. Wait, did you hear that? You're not alone.